Thank you for staying with us. Now, there are many human rights systems in Africa which have positively influenced the improvement of human rights situation across the continent. But human rights abuses still occur across the African continent, and the West African region is not an exception. Most of the violations can be attributed to political instability, racial discrimination, corruption, post-colonialism, monopoly of power, amongst others. Now, there are many challenges facing West Africa's state in combating human rights abuses, and there is a need to review the status of human rights as well as proffer solutions to them. Executive Director, Human Rights Advancement, Development and Advocacy Center, Ayodele Amin, joins me now via Zoom from Abuja to discuss this. Good morning. Thank you for joining us on TVC Breakfast.
Good morning. How are you today?
Very well, thank you.
I'm happy to be here.
Good to have you as well. Now, talk to us what the status of the human rights situation in West Africa is, because you had a document and you had findings. You went on researching into, before you concluded on or came up with the document. Talk to us what you found out.
Thank you very much. We actually set out a human rights assessment project with three major deliverables. One is the human rights assessment report, which we launched yesterday. The second are human rights fact sheets on each countries and thematic areas and institutions in West Africa and Africa as a whole. For example, we intend to have a fact sheet on the African Union human rights infrastructure, on the ECOWAS human rights framework, and then we have for each country in West Africa. And the third deliverable is an online one-stop shop for human rights information in West Africa, because we looked for that when we are working on this project, we couldn't find. So we decided to develop it. So if you want to know about the human rights situation in Côte d'Ivoire, you can actually go to the database and you can get all the information there, and it will be updated regularly. Now, what did we find out? One is that this is a different kind of report. It's not a naming and shaming report like other international human rights organizations does, but it is a report that puts into consideration the peculiar challenges in West Africa. Now, to talk about what we found out, it's going to take us time because we have a recommendation of about 3 pages for the report. But I will try and just dwell on some few things. One, we discovered, and when we look at the treaties character of each country in West Africa, so we discovered that more countries signed and ratified UN treaties more than their own AU treaties. Okay? We also discovered that in their reporting mechanism to the African Commission, not a single country in West Africa is up to date with the report. We also discovered, we look at the constitution of all the countries in West Africa, and we look at their human rights references. And we discovered that in all the constitution of French-speaking West African countries, they mention a soft law, which is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and they embedded the African Charter on Human and People's Rights into their constitution. Not a single English-speaking countries actually did that, apart from Nigeria that domesticated the African Charter. So in terms of the human rights process and ratifying treaties, this is what we discovered. We also discovered that when we look at our chapter 11, looking at human rights cases, we kind of feel that when we talk about herdsmen crisis, it's actually a Nigerian problem. It's not. You have to go and read the chapter 11 of the report, where you can see that it's in Benin Republic, we think it's just a Nigerian problem. It's actually not. It's a problem in Ghana. It's a problem in Benin Republic. So we actually find that out, that we have similar problems. And when we talk about, and when you look at all these countries as well, you have peculiar problem with the countries. For example, if you look at Liberia, the major problem there is not extrajudicial execution, it's not unlawful killing, it's actually sexual violence. And the same thing, you look at Sierra Leone, you have sexual violence that affect children. So these are some of the things we discover back and dwell more as we move on the program.
All right, so that we can make best use of our time. Talk to us about the cases that were analyzed in this report, because the cases were taken from January to December of 2020. Was there a common thread that ran through these cases?
Yes, of course. Maybe it might be useful if I can just do a kind of a synopsis of what the report is all about. Now, we divided the report into three parts, three strands. The first strand is looking at human rights legal framework, human rights institutions, and human rights processes. And we dealt with that in chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 4, and chapter 9. And what we actually look at is, without the human rights law, there is actually no human rights anyway. So we look at treaties that are ratified by states, and we have to give recommendation for those that were not ratified. The second strand of the report is targeting vulnerable and targeted groups. And in this situation, we look at women, children, journalists, people living with disability, human rights defenders, and LGBT. And we look at how that has been, the perspective of that in the entire West African region. Now, beyond these two, we now focus on problems being faced by government on the issue of human rights. And in this case, we look at, from chapter 8, looking at the matrix between human rights, democratic rights, corruption, and insecurity. And it is a good read to actually look at that chapter and see how these are common challenges in the entire West Africa, because all these three problems affected every single country in West Africa. There are issues of democratic rights, there are issues of corruption, and there are issues of insecurity. And under insecurity, we develop a ranking table. And we develop this just from human rights perspective. We are looking at certain indicators. For example, we rate we score terrorism over banditry and kidnapping. That is higher than petty crime, higher than government action and inaction that leads to insecurity. And then the list is cybersecurity. And we're able to look at which country can you be in which your human right is mostly insecure. And we discovered that is Nigeria, because more people are likely to die from terrorism than they will die from cybersecurity. So we look at that under that particular chapter. But we also look in 2020, what are the local human rights violations in West Africa that attracted global interest? So we dealt with three. The governance crisis in Mali, which has also resurfaced now. The military guys have taken over again. Then we have the child's rights case in Sierra Leone and NSAS in Nigeria. We look at all this. So, and in terms of that, you'll be able to see the common denominator in the entire West African countries.
All right, quickly before we let you go, talk to us about some of the recommendations made, especially at improving the human rights framework in West Africa.
Yes, we have three sets of recommendations. The first set of recommendations are thematic recommendations. The second set of recommendations are institutional recommendations. And the third set of recommendations are country-specific recommendations. Now, under thematic recommendation, we look at issues of the link between human rights and environmental rights. And we try to make specific recommendations to states to actually do more in terms of environmental protection. But we also look at other things like issues of insecurity, how human rights can be used as both preventive and a solution to some of these insecurity problems. For example, now, when you look at the crisis in the Northeast. You know, those crises just start like that. It starts when impunity is allowed to filter. For example, when cattle rustlers take cows of some of the Fulani herdsmen, and there's no justice. There is no way they get remedy. So they pick up arms to get justice for themselves. So if you have followed the human rights protocol, which means every human rights abusers must be brought to justice. That may have been it could have been prevented. So we make recommendation in that aspect. But we also make institutional recommendation to the UN, to the African Commission, to the African Court, and to ECOWAS as a whole. Then we now went into countries and looking at treaties. For example, Guinea-Bissau have not joined the ICC. So we made recommendation that they should join. And we made recommendation that the human rights element of countries' constitution should be upgraded and improved. And so it's a detailed 33 pages recommendation.
Now, one of the things mentioned in that report is that the pursuit of justice presented a mixed picture of progress. Now, the question is, where then lies the hope of the common man?
Oh, can you say that again? Sorry?
Now, I said the report presented a picture in the pursuit of justice. It presented a picture of mixed progress. That's what the report presented.
Yeah.
And justice, the courts, is seen as the last hope of the common man. And I'm asking, where then lies the hope of the common man if there is a mixed picture being presented?
Okay, now, the report is a mirror. It's a mirror of the facts. No matter how much you dislike it, how much you want to get angry with it, but that is the fact, that is who we are. You know, we have not, and if you look at the report, we did a human rights environment ranking from the promotional point of view. And part of the indicators we use is court judgment that are not being obeyed, you know, and that is there in terms of the compliance gap that we have. But that is the fact that we struggle to provide justice for the ordinary people. Take, for example, the Kadijatu Sanko case in Sierra Leone. And this is where we said that we need to actually look at the possibility of how we support the stakeholders to make this happen. This is a case of a 5-year-old girl that was raped to death by 2 of her family members. The case was charged to court, and the police charged these 2 people for murder. Okay? And they were discharged and acquitted. We can't actually say that the jury system are wrong. We think that the charges were wrong. Because when you come to the issue of murder, you must prove intent. It must be premeditated. So the investigation wasn't robust. And there is no support for the police to do that. So these are the gaps that we need to look at. One of the things the report also did with the fact sheet is to provide a complaint information for ordinary citizens. We are looking at the layers of protection, moral protection we have. It's not just in your country. It's not just with your Human Rights Commission. It's not just with your National Assembly Human Rights Committee. There are a lot of layers of, so you can move from your country and you move to the region. You can complain to the African Commission. Can go to the African Court. If your country have accepted individual access, you can go to the UN. You have UNOFAS. You have the Office of the High Commission for Human Rights, West African Office. So you have that. Then you have treaty-based committees. You have charter-based committees. And we provided details, contact details of all these bodies that an ordinary person can pick the fact sheet and said, I want to email to complain about the violation of my rights or the abuse of my rights so that something is done about it. And there are a lot of NGOs who can also contact. But we intend to take
we
this
have to leave the conversation here now.
With civil society. And
we have to leave this conversation here now. Ayodele Amin, Executive Director, Human Rights Advancement Development and Advocacy Center in Abuja. We must commend your efforts to bring this report to the fore, and we hope that those, like you have mentioned, the stakeholders can push this forward such that every single person gets justice as at when due. Thank you so much for your time on the program.
Thank you.